In the early hours of the 9th of April 1940, Europe seemed to hold its breath. Across the cold waters of the Baltic and the North Sea, the German war machine moved with ruthless precision toward a kingdom that had long believed geography and prudence would shield it from catastrophe. In our known history, Denmark fell within hours, its government capitulating in the face of overwhelming force. Yet imagine, for a moment, a different dawn. Imagine that in those crucial hours, Danish resolve hardened into action, and the quiet nation chose resistance over resignation. The plan had been simple, almost bloodless in its ambition. German forces would seize key ports, airfields, and government centers before dawn, presenting Copenhagen with a fait accompli. Speed was the essential weapon. Denmark's flat terrain and modest military strength were thought to offer no meaningful obstacle. Berlin anticipated compliance, not conflict, but in this alternate chain of events, Danish commanders, alerted by fragmentary intelligence and driven by a sober understanding of what occupation would mean, made a fateful decision. Orders were issued not to negotiate immediately, but to deny the invader the infrastructure upon which his timetable depended. As German transport ships approached Copenhagen and other critical harbors, Danish engineers worked with desperate efficiency. Explosive charges, long prepared but never expected to be used, were detonated along key piers. Dock facilities splintered into twisted timber and concrete. Cranes collapsed into the harbor waters. At fuel depots near Aalborg and along the eastern coast of Jutland, storage tanks were set alight or rendered useless by calculated sabotage. Thick smoke rose into the gray Scandinavian sky, not as a symbol of defeat, but as a declaration that Denmark would not be taken intact. The consequences were immediate. German naval units, expecting orderly landings, found chaos and obstruction. Troop disembarkations slowed to a crawl. Heavy equipment could not be unloaded with the efficiency required for a lightning operation. Aircraft, intended to refuel quickly and dominate Danish airspace, faced unexpected shortages. What had been conceived as a swift surgical strike began to resemble an improvised campaign. In Copenhagen, the government convened under the shadow of uncertainty. Historically, the Danish leadership chose cooperation to spare civilian lives and preserve limited autonomy. In this altered reality, the destruction of critical infrastructure had already crossed a threshold. The die was cast. Resistance, though measured and strategic, became official policy. Danish forces withdrew from exposed positions and regrouped inland, particularly in Jutland, where rivers and narrow causeways offered opportunities for delay. The German High Command, under Adolf Hitler, had regarded Denmark as a mere stepping stone in the broader design of Operation Weserübung. The invasion of Norway, Denmark's purpose was logistical, to secure airfields and sea lanes that would support the northern thrust. A prolonged struggle there threatened to unbalance the entire timetable. Reinforcements earmarked for Norway now faced diversion. Supplies had to be rerouted through less convenient ports. The smooth choreography of Blitzkrieg faltered. Weeks, not hours, now defined the Danish campaign. Skirmishes flared along rail lines and crossroads. Danish units, though outmatched in numbers and equipment, leveraged intimate knowledge of terrain. Bridges were sabotaged after German vanguards had crossed, isolating forward elements. Railway switches were dismantled. Communication lines were cut in the night. The occupation became a contest of endurance rather than a demonstration of inevitability. The civilian population, initially stunned, found itself drawn into a new national posture. Civil defense units coordinated evacuations from contested areas. Local officials refused to provide administrative support to occupying forces.
And if the Germans find out, they mustn't.
Fishermen along the coasts reported German movements to remaining Danish commands. The line between soldier and citizen blurred, not in open insurrection, but in quiet obstruction. Denmark's famed social cohesion transformed into a subtle weapon. Berlin responded with mounting frustration. Propaganda outlets had heralded the northern campaign as proof of German invincibility. Now reports filtered back of stubborn resistance from a country many Germans scarcely considered a battlefield. Additional infantry divisions were dispatched, consuming transport capacity and fuel at a moment when both were strategically precious. The Luftwaffe intensified operations, seeking to break morale and secure air superiority over the contested zones. Yet every sortie required logistics that the damaged infrastructure no longer easily supplied. Internationally, the prolonged Danish resistance resonated far beyond its modest scale. In London, British planners observed with cautious optimism. The delay imposed upon German operations in Scandinavia offered breathing space. Naval deployments in the North Sea could be adjusted. Intelligence assessments shifted. Denmark, previously assumed lost, now appeared as a variable complicating German ambition. In Stockholm and Helsinki, policymakers took note of a small nation's defiance, recalibrating their own assumptions about accommodation and resistance. For the Danish monarchy, the crisis assumed profound symbolic weight. King Christian X, who in actual history remained a figure of quiet continuity under occupation, now became a visible emblem of national endurance. Public appearances, carefully staged yet resolute, reinforced the message that sovereignty had not dissolved overnight. The monarchy's presence steadied a society under strain, offering a focal point around which resistance could organize without descending into chaos. Yet the imbalance of power remained stark. Germany's industrial might and military depth dwarfed Denmark's capacity. As weeks passed, attrition favored the invader. Danish ammunition stocks dwindled. Fuel for remaining vehicles grew scarce. Communications became increasingly precarious under relentless pressure. What Denmark had achieved was not the repulsion of the Wehrmacht, but the transformation of its mission from a swift occupation to a grinding imposition. This altered campaign carried strategic ripples. The invasion of Norway, dependent upon synchronized action, encountered complications. German forces operating around Narvik and Trondheim faced supply uncertainties exacerbated by the Danish delay. Allied interventions, though ultimately unsuccessful in Norway, benefited from the disruption. The narrative of unstoppable expansion acquired its first visible cracks earlier than in our recorded past. Within Denmark, the extended fighting reshaped the character of occupation even after formal resistance could no longer be sustained. Having tasted weeks of organized defiance, Danish society did not slip easily into passive compliance. Networks formed during the fighting endured. Sabotage, intelligence sharing, and underground publications emerged sooner and with greater coordination. The occupier, having paid in time and resources for control, confronted a population already practiced in obstruction. For Germany, the lesson was sobering. Blitzkrieg depended not merely on superior arms, but on psychological shock. Where shock failed, the machinery strained. Denmark's brief yet protracted stand did not alter the ultimate outcome of 1940. France would still fall. The continent would still tremble beneath the swastika's shadow. But the myth of effortless conquest would have been dented at the very outset in Scandinavia. History often turns upon decisions made in minutes. The Danish choice to destroy its own ports and fuel depots would have been such a decision, costly, irreversible, and fraught with risk. It would not have saved the kingdom from occupation, yet it would have imposed a price upon aggression, buying time for others and forging a legacy of resistance rooted not in grand battles, but in deliberate denial. In the cold calculus of war, Denmark remained a small piece upon a vast board. But in this alternate chronicle, that piece refused to be swept aside without consequence. For several crucial weeks in the spring of 1940, the rhythm of German expansion would have been disrupted by a nation that chose to resist, altering the tempo of a campaign and reminding Europe that even in the shadow of overwhelming force, agency still existed.
Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into alternate history fascinating,